the average tenure for a dispatcher is down from 3 years, and now it's 1 to 2. That's
Wow.
it. And then people are out.
Hey y'all, thanks for tuning in to another episode of 911 Delta Tether for Life podcast. As usual, this episode may not be suitable for all listeners due to language and content, so listen with care and stay safe out there.
Hey everyone, tonight we have Robin joining us from Atlanta. She has over 10 years experience dispatching and supervisor plus SWAT negotiator. She's the founder of Crisis IQ, which we will talk more about later in the show. But Robin, go ahead and tell us about yourself and your career.
Well, hello, hello. Thank you for having me on. Um, I'm from Alaska, but I grew up some in Texas and Georgia as well. I live in Atlanta now. I really like Atlanta. I really hate the weather. I miss the cold so much.
Oh my gosh, really?
Um, yes, I love the cold. I want icy roads,
Oof.
all of it. I want snow every day.
Mm-mm.
Yeah,
Just
that's
for
not for me either,
me.
but Alaska, Texas and Georgia are a big change from that climate.
Yeah, yeah. My dad worked in the oil industry, so
Okay.
he's
Okay.
a Texas man who got sent up there, but it was nothing but Texas and Louisiana rednecks up there. So you all fit in, you know.
Right.
Woo.
That's funny.
Um, so then I came down here as a late teen. I got a job at a hospital as a unit secretary because my mom worked there and she got me the job. Yay, nepotism. Um, and then all of the ER techs, I worked in an ER, all of the ER techs were also EMTs. So a lot of them worked at ambulance companies. And so one of them got me an interview at an ambulance company. And then I did that for about a year doing non emergency dispatch. But I worked overnight and nobody does non emergency overnight. So I was just sitting around listening on the scanner to all the like crazy 911 calls. And I was like, I want a piece of that. So, and then I just kind of climbed the ladder there and found places to fit in. And I got into hostage negotiator almost as an accident because they sent out an email saying that they were interviewing for negotiators, and then they also said something about like taking on tactical dispatchers, but they weren't sure at this time. But you should put in interest if you're interested. Um, so I sent an email, and then but I guess it was kind of vague. And then the morning before my interview, I talked to one of my friends who was a negotiator, and I was like, "Hey, do you want to like run through this with me? Like, tell me what they might be likely to ask me about. Like, is there anything I should research?" And he was talking to me about all of this hostage negotiation stuff, and I was like, "Right." And he's like, "You realize that you put in for the negotiator spot, not tactical dispatch, right?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, totally."
Oh no.
Yeah, so then I had to like quickly figure out a lot enough about that to get through the interview, which was like a 14-person panel interview.
Oh
Ew.
my God.
Very intimidating. The whole team was there.
Yeah, that
Um,
would not be cool.
yeah, but and I also knew that there were only like a couple um, dispatcher negotiators like in the entire state. But I got on the team, so
Awesome.
yeah, so that was really fun. But getting to go on call outs was the best. Like, even if I wasn't doing much, like, even if nobody was negotiating, we were just kind of like nearby, it still felt like, ooh, like,
Yeah. Total
like you're on a
badass.
field trip or, you know, it was really cool.
Well, that's
That.
awesome.
I mean, did you have any interesting negotiations while you were doing that?
We had the one that I always think of. is we had a lady who said she was going to jump off of her fourth floor balcony
Mm,
onto concrete. And
mm,
so a police officer and I, who another negotiator who was an officer, and I rode over there together. And he's about 6'3", super fit, thin, leggy sort of guy. And we got out there and we ran up the 4 flights of stairs to this lady's apartment. And then we walked inside and he like made contact with her. And I was just standing behind him like, I was so out of breath. And I had called because he just happened to be in dispatch, like hanging out whenever the call came out. And so I called the team lead while we were in his patrol car, like going code over there. And she called me back, like right when we got upstairs. And so I answered the phone, and I'm like, "Hello." And she was like, "Are you okay?" But he was able to he talked her down. He was really, really good. And she didn't want to talk to anybody else, so I was just kind of standing around with the fire department. But I always think of that call because I was like, God, I'm so glad I wasn't by myself. That poor lady.
right.
Yeah, she would have been a goner if that were me, because
Oh, I thought fire was gonna have to shock me back. I was fighting for my life going up that last set of stairs.
Oh
Oh my
man.
gosh.
That's great. So you did that for over did you do dispatching and like how long did you do the negotiating for? Like
I did that for the last 2 years that I was at that
okay.
agency,
Okay. Well, that's
and I did dispatch at the same time.
I think that's pretty cool how like there's an agency here that allows folks to dispatchers to be on the different teams and stuff
Mm-hmm.
to a certain degree, and the agency that me and Anna came from, like that really wasn't. I mean, I think you could like put in for Anna, couldn't we put in for like crisis negotiation, but I don't think any dispatcher ever actually made
Mm-mm.
the
No.
team.
Well, there's a good
So
argument
that's
for it, like because we're the ones who are always
yeah.
negotiating with people over the phone and we're the first point of
Right.
contact. And
Like
Yeah.
what you're doing every day,
yeah,
all the time.
Yeah.
exactly. Like it makes so much sense. But then when I got on my first call out, I was like, okay, like I kind of understood that
Yeah.
I was out of place a little bit there. Just because like it was for a barricaded gunman. He had his girlfriend. He had shot someone and then holed up in his apartment with his girlfriend, and he was refusing to come out, refusing to let her leave. Um, and so we were on the perimeter, sort of like on the back of the perimeter. The negotiators were, um, and then one negotiator was in the Bearcat, the like armored vehicle, and I was just kind of out there like, well, what do I do? And all of the everybody else on the team was like, oh, we're doing intel. Do you want to do intel? And I was like, well, I don't have a laptop. And then they were like, all right, well, and so we were just trying to, because all the cops had a laptop. I
Right.
couldn't ride in the Bearcat because I didn't have a vest. And I didn't have a helmet. And, there were just certain things that I could not do. And then I was standing at the back of this, we had all the streets blocked off and stuff. Um, and I was standing there, and a guy in tactical gear who was on the team that I didn't know um, went to pass me at the same time. Two civilians came up walking their dog to ask me a question because I'm wearing like a police shirt and a police hat. And the guy in tactical gear was like, hey, tell them to F and leave. And I was like, okay. And so they came over there and they were like, hey, are we allowed to walk our dog here? And I was like, hey, leave. And just said it like mean. And they were like, God, okay. And they walked away, but I was like, oh my God, what if they had said no? Like, I don't have a gun. I don't have a vest. I don't have anything I need to be out here. So, I mean, I get why some people don't want to take on a
Yeah.
dispatcher, but I mean, the majority of the calls you go to, you're just talking to somebody on the phone. So,
Yeah. Well, that's
Right.
pretty cool.
And like even if you don't want them out there in the field, like I still think it's a great training for dispatchers to
yes.
have. I had a guy, the first agency I worked at, and at that agency we were the PSAP, but we only dispatched fire and rescue.
Mm,
And I had a fool that called 911, basically same situation, except he was in, I don't think he had shot anybody yet, but he was in a single family home and wouldn't let the wife or girlfriend out. And he wouldn't get off the phone with me. Well, at that time, I wasn't even, I had, didn't dispatch law enforcement. I hadn't, I, I was like, okay, we're just gonna, I just pretended he was suicidal. I'm like, well, we're just gonna go through the same thing and see, right? Um, and they finally managed to gain entry and get a hold of him. But I was like, now I'm stuck on the phone with this dude. And if I had tried to transfer him to the sheriff's office and she had picked up, but if she said anything, he was flipping out. He was like,
mm-hmm.
and so she just ended up muting the phone. And I'm like, oh, great. Now I'm stuck here with this guy. I got no idea what I'm doing. And, but it worked out. It's just, that's a great, training for dispatchers because that's all you do. A lot of times you're just negotiating with people to give you something, anything that will be helpful.
Yeah, it
Yes.
is. It is great training. I went through. There's 3 levels of training for a negotiator, and I went through all 3. Um, and they were so helpful, especially the second one, because the first one is really like, hey, these are the rules, and this is generally how it works. Like you're supposed to have a team of negotiators, like at least 4. And there's what you can say, sort of like you can lie, but you can't get caught. So like try
Right.
not to lie. Don't make promises you can't keep. Don't give them alcohol. Don't let them
Oh,
don't
God.
let them talk to their mom on the phone, like stuff like that. Um, and then I came out of it, certified as a negotiator, and I was like, I hope I'm not on one of these like initial call outs because I feel like in a lot of training, like no one tells you like what to say. Like they don't give you
Right.
examples of what to say. But the second part, the second class that I went to was a lot more of that, and I felt like much more prepared after level 2. But I offer at my company a hostage negotiation class for dispatchers, specifically for dispatchers. And I have a whole section of common things that they say, and then responses you can have, rules you should follow, how to keep them talking, what the point is. Because a lot of people think that the main point of hostage negotiation or crisis negotiation is to like get all the hostages out, but it's actually to slow the event down.
Right.
Um, so
That's
it's a good
awesome.
class. Everyone should take it.
So, switching gears from negotiation and from the supervisor perspective.
So, I would give us an idea of what that was like as far as how the floor worked, and then yeah, how many as a shift supervisor, how many people did you supervise?
So we could have as few as 3. 3 was our minimum, and then 8 was considered fully staffed, not counting recruits. And you
Big
could have
gap.
as many recruits as you had people in there.
Oh God.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
our recruits did like I think like 2 weeks of training off the floor, and then we're sent immediately to the floor, and all of the rest of their training was done on the floor. I was the supervisor on night shift, and we were chronically short staffed. So I was a working supervisor. It was very, very rare that I was able to just supervise and not
Yeah.
work a channel. We also didn't have a separation between call takers and dispatchers, like we did both. So if you were working main police radio, you were only doing that. But if you were working fire or records like NCIC, then you were also answering the phone at
So
the same time. So it was very much spinning plates. Um, the best way I found as a working supervisor to be able to keep an eye on everyone and everything was to work main myself, because I wasn't tied up on a call. Um, I could always like look at other people's calls, see what was going on. I was able to listen more like in the room to what they were saying and like step in quickly if there was a problem or someone was using the wrong protocol or what have you.
yeah, that
Um,
pretty much sounds like our old agency, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
I loved all of the girls on my shifts. Love them. Shout out to the city girls. Um, but the hardest part of the job was just like the admin type stuff or just like people management, trying to get everyone to consistently come to work or
Yeah.
dealing with hurt feelings. Very much that, and like my agency had sort of like silos, like each shift was its own little universe. And it
Mm,
had its own little rules and like the way that you did things, and everybody knew how each shift was different, but there was no communication between the supervisors,
Mm.
which I think is really important, for the supervisors to meet like without upper management present, to keep those silos from forming. Um, so you very much felt like kind of like on an island. And then sometimes you would have a shift that was like consistently like snitching on your shift. And
Oh,
then, you know,
Jesus.
yeah.
my shift hated that other shift. And then we also had a big revenge call out problem. Did you guys ever have that?
Uh, yeah, you could probably
Yeah.
call it that. And we had a bunch of snitch bitches too. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, we had our everybody had to take call, of course.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the call schedule was posted. So if somebody called out, if Jennifer, called out and you got called in, you were looking on the calendar to see the next time Jennifer was
Right.
Yeah.
on call and you were calling out. Like
Like,
that was such a big problem. And sometimes it would be like two people and they would just do it for months.
oh God. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
it was brutal.
yeah, that was, yeah, I think we can relate to that too.
We had Dan Jewis on a couple weeks ago, and he talked about, just not training supervisors to
Hmm.
do those things like the admin, the people management. We promote people because they're good at what they do, but just because they're good at what they do doesn't mean they're good at managing, right?
Right.
And yeah, so I think that's always a big hole. And then the understaffing problem where the supervisors are mostly working the floor and they're not
Hmm.
Yeah.
allowed to do their supervisor duties, or they can't because you're working, and
Right.
that's yeah.
Yeah.
And you can
That's
never like pull people off the floor to have private conversations.
right.
Um, any feedback that you're trying to give, like almost exclusively has to be like just public
Yeah.
feedback, which,
Right.
there's a time for that and there's also not. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we had the kitchen, so we knew if we were going to the kitchen, it wasn't going to be good. So that was our meet place with the supervisor.
that's funny.
Can I see you
Yeah.
in the kitchen? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
What did I F
Yeah.
up
I would
this
just
time?
say my CAD was kind of like in the middle of the room and then all the other CADs were around the outside walls. And
Okay.
so I would just say, step into my office and they would come and like sit at my CAD with me and very quietly I'd be like, why did you do that? Why?
So how do you or did you manage the stress and maintain resilience um, during
Um,
your time?
it was really hard sometimes. I found it very hard as a supervisor when I had people on my shift. One of them was is still a really good friend of mine, but she just like she doesn't really care. Like she's there for a paycheck,
Mm.
which is fine, but she doesn't. She's just like very like blasé, and it's so hard to find a motivator for people like that. You know, like she's not paying attention to the radio as well as she should. And I'm like, you know, these guys, they're your friends outside of work. I'm like, we know their wives, we know their children. Like something could happen if you're not paying
Right.
attention. And she's just like,
It only takes
um,
a second.
yeah, exactly. But it's very hard to encourage someone who doesn't feel that sort of responsibility to feel it and to be better in that way. So that was really stressful, but I just did my best. I was always looking for new ways to like get them excited about the job or so they'll feel inspired and like want to be
Hmm.
there. Always trying to get them up the ladder. I'm like, you know, there's so much room at the top. Like, let's all go together. You know, when I'm not supervisor anymore, like if I move to admin or whatever, who's going to take my spot? And then who's going to take her spot? Like, let me get you into classes. Let me prepare you for that so you're the best person. And
Yeah.
so concentrating on like positive things like that made it easier for me to handle when it felt like a complete shit show.
Yeah.
So I don't know, just mindfulness, positivity, and then medication helps too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now you teach a class on mental health or dispatcher wellness. I
Mm-hmm.
saw, right?
Yep, I do. So at Crisis IQ, my company, which is crisisiqtraining.com, if anyone would like to go look, I do offer a class on dispatcher mental health. This is not like your typical sort of like APCO class where it's like, what is the definition of stress? What is the definition of eustress?
Right.
I'm like, let's talk about the real reasons, like why this job is hard and why it's stressful. You know, I'm like, let's talk about bad calls and what that does to your psyche. Let's talk about bad sinners. Let's talk about bad management or absent management in a lot of cases. And then, like, ways that you can improve your center. Like, it's not enough for me just to identify what's wrong. Like, I want people to know that they have the agency to like improve things where they are. And then to also talk about anxiety. Like a lot of people that I know who have been dispatchers for a long time have anxiety. My cat just jumped up here. I'm so sorry. That's Gomer. I just read the other day that the average tenure for a dispatcher is down from 3 years, and now it's 1 to 2. That's
Wow.
it, and then people are out. I think a lot of it is generational. I feel like these younger people coming in know that they don't have to have a job that's hard,
Hmm.
you know, and this is always going to be a hard job. There's
Right.
no mitigating that. It's always going to be hard. It's always going to be stressful. So you really have to like stay on top of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And with the like being so young too, I mean, I'm always going to be a believer in this that like 18, 19, yeah, there are some mature 18, 19-year olds somewhere out there, but I
Mm-hmm.
don't believe it's going to be for dispatching at that point. You like have no life experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's just the things that you hear. I don't know. I just think
Yeah,
that's
and you
way too
have
young, you know?
I agree, and you have pressures coming from places that I wouldn't have expected before I became a dispatcher. Um, Especially now that as a society we're much more aware of mental health
Mhm.
and getting mental health calls and how hard it is to handle those calls because you have so much pressure. Like you have the pressure of, you know, the caller is like, don't send a cop, send a social worker. And
Right.
you're like, that's not how this works. At least
Right.
not like in my county, you know? And then, like, you don't want to send EMS to an unsafe scene, but you don't want to send a police officer out and, like, something go wrong because you know this person is just having a crisis and acting irrationally, and you don't want to, like, amp it up any further. So it's
Yeah.
just you have all of those pressures, and then vicarious traumatization. You have a lot of we had a lot of over identification at our center. I felt with um, people who were parents. If there was like a missing 3 year old or something that was wearing a Paw Patrol shirt, we would always have someone crying, being like, "My baby loves Paw Patrol." So,
Yeah.
I would be like, that better not be one of my damn kids.
right.
Better get their tails back in the house.
Yeah.
Um,
And you have
yeah.
like people committing suicide over the phone. Like
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
every
Mhm.
year we had more and more and more, you
Yeah.
know, and it's a lot. It's a whole lot to deal with.
It is.
It is a lot. And I think people, you're right, people, they know they don't have to have a hard job. Like I know in the year before I left, we had I think 5 people leave for federal government at home,
Hmm.
work from home, computer analyst positions, right?
Hmm.
And now they have the qualifications, they have the skills to do it, and they don't have to work night shift and
Right.
they don't have to work 12-hour shifts. And for me, when I got into it, I loved that schedule. Like that
Hmm.
fit my lifestyle. It worked for me. And but then when my husband and I had kids and he was at the time still on shift work as a firefighter, it's too hard to
Hmm.
do childcare and all of that. And so I just went to part-time and then did that for several years. And one of the things is, yeah, they don't feel like they need to have that hard job. But I do think there's still a subset of people out there that are high achievers and are like
Hmm.
driven by it, right? And they have this, need to do some service. And so they want to do it, but the centers sometimes make it so damn hard because of all of, the things that we've talked about,
Hmm.
lack of management or absent management. Because God forbid,
The
if you're
cat.
on night shift, you may never see your center manager. You might not even know what that fool looks like,
Right.
Yeah.
right? And that used to
Hmm.
irritate me. And I spoke up about that so many times. And when we have um, a communications manager and then an operations supervisor. And then it was the shift supervisors. And then eventually we got a training supervisor position, which I actually wrote the job description and researched all about getting it for the center and wrote the letter to the sheriff as to why we should do this and blah, blah, blah. And one of my key points was we need someone who can be visible day and night. Like
Yes.
the ops supervisor at the time she was actually, and both the ops supervisors that we had at that time were amazing. One left and then another one came or got promoted, and they would come on the floor and work all the time. I mean,
Yeah.
they were amazing. But, you know, the communications manager at one point early in my career, she came in one night and like her and her husband and answered phones because we were getting our asses handed to us. And that was it. After that, it was like 8 to 4. And then the other, that upper echelon, the head shed, they just they're not visible. Or if they are, you did something, or you're
Yeah.
having training, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So it was like that was such a thing for me. And it's like, and also I think you're right about the supervisors being able to get together and meet, because our supervisor meetings were always with the upper
Upper. Yeah.
Right.
right. And
And
so,
everyone's afraid to
Right.
say something
right,
Exactly.
because the call is coming from inside the house. Like
Yeah.
the problem is in the room with us.
right,
Yep. But nobody
Um,
right.
has the balls to say anything. And everyone bitches about the same bullshit every meeting. And there's
Every time.
no resolution to anything ever.
Right.
It's
mhm.
like, so
Mhm.
what are we
Why?
doing here? Like, this
Yeah.
is a waste of my time. I'm tired. I want to go home and go to bed. Like,
Right. And it's
you
always
know.
the meeting always has to be at like 9 a.m.
Right.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. Right.
we had a
Right.
meeting. They used to be at 9 a.m. And in like after I became a supervisor at like my third one, I was like, "Can I ask why we have these meetings at 9 a.m.?" Like,
Right. Super inconvenient for night
yeah.
shift.
I was like, "What are we supposed to do?" And the boss at the time was like, "Huh, I never thought about it that way." And so then she, like the next one, she sends me an email and she's like, "You'll be glad to know that we're gonna have this one at noon. So
At
get
noon.
on
Oh
me."
my
And I was like, "Girl," I said, "Okay, so next month can we have it at midnight?" Because
Right.
right.
that's the same thing. But she was so proud of herself for moving it from
Right.
9 to noon, and I was like, "Just shoot me." Like,
Wow.
Right.
Yeah, that's worse.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was awful. Which
Yeah.
another plug for my company, all of my classes I offer for day shift and for night shift because when I was looking for training, there was no such thing as nighttime training and flipping that schedule. I had to really want to go to something.
Oh
Right.
yeah.
I want people to be able to come and get training that's going to make them better at their job, more confident. But I also want you to take a couple days off the floor. Get out of that environment, come do some training, do it from home, in your pajamas, on your laptop. Don't flip your schedule. Like, I want it to be a break and I want it to be like a conversation like this where we get to exchange stories. I want it to be
Hmm.
like a networking because these aren't certification classes. These are like genuine continuing education.
So, what are the type classes that you do offer, just so that the folks know?
So I have an advanced call taking class. Um, Within that class, did you guys have EMD, EFD, EPD? Well, maybe not PD, but
Yeah, we
Not
did
PD.
MD
Did we
and
have we have PD?
no, we
Yeah,
had
no, we did.
EMD and EFD.
Yeah, yeah.
so within the advanced call taking class, I'll teach you how because the protocols can be really frustrating,
Mm.
especially the PD ones.
Ugh.
When you are,
The
uh,
FD ones
yeah.
were enough to send me through the roof. I can't even imagine PD. I would.
Oh my
Yeah.
God, isn't that the truth?
When you're like, I have to ask this person this stupid question that's going to make me sound like a robot, and he's going to lose all respect for me immediately. Um,
Yeah.
yes. So I
Yeah.
talk about how to use the protocols, how to get through and pass your calls, because you have to have the protocols, and they are good for new people who don't know what they're doing.
Hmm.
But how you can still do your interrogation and ask your questions within the protocol, like how to use it as a tool instead of like looking at it as an obstacle.
Right.
So, and then
That's
I just
cool.
talk about lessons that I've learned through 10 years of call
Yeah.
taking that I wish, someone had told me. Um, and then I have a supervisor class where we talk about actual things you need to know, like how to professionally tell somebody that they smell bad. You know,
Shit.
you have to have like those big, hard talks.
Yeah, you do.
How to get your people to come to work, how to identify motivators. I have a training class for trainers where I'm like, you need to be giving breaks. they're not just for the trainee, they're for you too. You know,
Right.
and if you're training somebody overnight, I highly recommend like get all the new information you're going to be teaching them that day. Teach that before midnight. If you're
Oh yeah,
working
get in the first 6 hours, boy.
6 hours, and then the second six just needs to be review and practice. Like these people are so tired, and like
Mm-hmm.
it, don't forget what it was like as a recruit and how hard it was to try to remember all of this information.
Hmm.
Plus, you're like exhausted, and you know,
Right.
it's just tough. So, like lessons learned from being a training officer, because I was a training officer for I think like 6 years, 7 years, something like that.
Yeah.
Um, and then I also have other classes. I have a class for like boosting confidence. And this one, some of my classes are not 911 specific. Like they can also be taken by corporate teams as well. Like I have a leadership class. But these classes are so good because it's just like the real raw information and there's no test. Um, I just really want you to get in there and like it's supposed to make you think more about your position and like what you can do with it. For example, my leadership class. Um, I had a boss a long time ago. Most of us, typically those of us who have done this for a long time and who are doing things like this, we are like, you know, kind of like you were like a superstar at your agency, right?
Mm-hmm.
Probably like you just are. You are a high achiever, you're high IQ, you're good at your job and you care. And all of those things have to kind of fall into place. So at an old job that I had where I was working at a hospital, my boss, I would just complain to her constantly about the people that they were hiring because I'm like, there's so much more they can do. Like, look at all this that I'm doing, and they're just like coming in and doing their thing and leaving. And it was driving me nuts. I was like, why do they not want to do more? Why are they not doing more? And like, we're getting paid the same, and look at all this that I'm doing, and they're not. And she finally pulled me aside and she was like, look, 10% of the people that you hire are going to be superstars. If you have 10%, consider yourself lucky. 80% are going to come in and they are going to meet expectations. That is why we have expectations. It's not a negative thing for someone to be always meets, never exceeds. That is literally the definition of doing what you're told, you know?
Right.
She's like, and then you have 10% that need to be cut. And you need to manage your expectations and learn to be more tolerant of these other people who are coming in and doing their job and meeting expectations. Like, not everybody is ambitious, not everybody wants to be a superstar, and that's fine. And I also want to say that the guy who comes in and does his 25 at as a sergeant and never rises any higher and then is just cool with his sergeant position and then he retires, he is probably having a much chiller experience than you.
Oh,
And
right. Oh, for sure. For
like,
sure. Yeah.
so you can't. I know a lot of leadership is like servant leadership and it's like, oh, let me help you climb the ladder. Let me help you climb the ladder. But like, not everyone's going to be that person and you shouldn't be disappointed in them for not
Mhm.
being
Right.
that. The website is crisisiqtraining.com. You can see the schedule, read the class descriptions, register, and pay like right there. I do live in person classes and I also do live online classes. So nothing is just a video that you're watching. It's meant to be collaborative, but don't be scared. I'm not There's no pop quiz. There's no test at the end. Like, I really just want you to think about how you can better yourself as a dispatcher or as a corporate team, how you can help others better themselves. It's like the real stuff that you always wish that someone had taught you just from an old lady who's been there.
And it's interesting that you said about the advanced call taking because I think that's a great class for people. I understand the whole point in the EMD, EFD, EPD, but yes, they can be so cumbersome sometimes. And when the first agency that I worked at, we did EMD, and we had the Pro QA software. So I learned it, and my trainer was actually wonderful, and like he was a good call taker. So he kind of gave me all that like advanced call taking sort of stuff with the EMD. But then when I switched agencies, they used the card sets.
Ugh.
Oh God.
Yeah.
I mean, so nobody ever did that. Like whatever, because they didn't QA us either, right?
Mm.
But then we got a new CAD system, and then they went to Pro QA, which of course had changed in like the 10 years that I hadn't used it. And now I'm like, oh my God. And then they added EFD. Also, they did not set it up so that it would automatically send
Mm.
priority calls or any call. So, which our old CAD didn't do that either, but you didn't have the Pro QA, right? So you had like let's say you picked up a CPR and the first line's the address, and then you had two lines to put in your call types. You could put in an arrest and an assist medical, and then tab down to your notes and write CPR in Prague. Boom, send it. Right? And everybody was getting going. But now I got Pro QA. So now I got to do that. And then while I want to give CPR instructions, now I have to remember to hit the send button.
Yeah.
So sometimes you're like, because we kind of did everything too, especially if you were setting on fire, and your fire partner would be like, hit the button, hit the button. You're like, shit. It's so annoying. Like, God, why make it that difficult? Just let it go. Like in the first agency I worked for, those priority calls just sent. As soon as you got to that stage in the Pro QA, they just boom went. And but yeah, I was like, God, that is so annoying. And then fires used to drive me insane because I just need to get 4 engines, 2 ambulances, a specialty piece, and 2 chiefs on the road. Like that's it. I don't need to know all this other stuff.
Right.
Right. And it's like, oh my God, this is painful. And so I think that's excellent. And it's so hard to get people motivated to engage in that when we're so ingrained in doing it the way that we always did it. Even though it's changed, it's not going to go back. So you might as well just let that go. But we're
Right.
still going to bitch because it makes
Totally.
us feel better, right?
That's what we
Right.
do.
Yeah.
I promise you, EPD is even worse.
I bet.
Ugh,
I bet.
It
God, I
is
could.
I
so
can't
awful.
imagine.
You'll get a hot call,
Yeah.
and you're like you want to get like everybody there. You just have to hope
Right.
that whoever's working main, that you
Right.
guys are like
Right.
phoned in with each other, because they're like, they just stole all this stuff from our store. They punched an old lady in the parking lot, and they pepper sprayed the manager. Somebody's foot got ran over. They're leaving the parking lot now. And then
Right.
the next question is like, what is the total estimated value of all items? And you're
Of
just
course
like,
it is.
it's so bad. It's so
Like,
bad.
F you, man.
Yeah.
Right. I know.
Oh,
And you're just like, just send it. Just send it.
Yeah. You're like,
Uh,
you just keep muting your call, and you're like, you're like, I just
yes.
want the descriptions. Just give me the descriptions. Give me a direction to travel.
yeah, no, I don't
Yep.
think I could handle that. My anxiety would be like, I couldn't do it.
It's a nightmare. But I talk about how to get through that, and then we talk about like other stuff, like how do you handle a call when it comes from somebody that you know, and then
That's good.
like maintaining confidentiality and not taking sides, and then also like things that you should listen for in the call to where you can actually help out the interrogation. So, like, a lady calls, it's a hot call. She says, someone just broke into my house. And you're like, oh my gosh. Like, and she's like, I don't know who it is. And then you're like, what is he wearing? And she describes it like down to the underwear. And you're like,
Right. That was my boyfriend 5 minutes ago.
Exactly. And
Mhm.
so those things are important. So if you hear something like that, I can tell you which point in the protocol you're allowed to ask your freelance questions. And then you need to be asking those kind of questions like, what is the person's name? Like, even if they say they don't know them, like,
Mhm.
you don't have to argue with them. You can just be like, oh, so what was his name? And then
Mhm.
they're like, "Rah," and they'll tell you the whole thing. Or, have you guys ever lived together? Let's establish if this is going to be considered a domestic or not.
Right.
Is he known to carry weapons? Like, there's so many other questions that you can ask when you realize that, she knows this person, and they're good safety questions. So, how to do stuff like that, or what to say when there's nothing to say, you know,
Yeah.
like when something so horrific and gruesome happens and the person is saying, what do I do? And when
Right.
you're a new call taker, you don't know what to say because you can't say everything is going to be okay.
Right.
So I give advice on what to say.
Cool. Very cool. And we talked a little bit about the retention issue, but we didn't talk about how do you think we can make that better? Because when we had our psychologist friend, Dr. Meredith, on, she was saying the same thing. And there's a pretty big gap between like when dispatchers either are getting out in that early stage or in like the 15-16 year mark,
Mm-hmm.
which is super interesting because at that point you've got a lot of years in your retirement system for most people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So why then would you choose to get out? Whereas like for firefighters and EMTs, there's a much higher attrition rate earlier in the career, and as they get past that like 10-15 year mark, they stay, whereas dispatchers don't have that same thing. And
Mm-hmm.
how do we change that? What are your thoughts?
Well, we could bring back pensions for dispatch, which I know none of these places are trying to hear. Um, but sometimes you got to throw money at the problem.
Right.
The dispatchers for air traffic control make so much more money than we make. Um, but for whatever reason, like, this is seen still as a job that's just answering the phone. Whereas air traffic control is seen as like, that must be scary and serious. And
Right.
you're like, what about this?
Right. And
Um,
in the reality of it, how many hijackings and plane crashes have there been compared to how many calls for service have the three of us taken?
mhm.
Right.
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 So you're under respected, you're underpaid, like, we've gone over so many just like reasons why the job is hard and why it's unfortunate, but there are so many things you can do to make it more appealing. And I think that is the big problem. Because the retention problem is so bad, people are holding on with both hands to piece of shit employees.
Yeah.
Mm,
People who are mean as hell, not taking good calls. They're being rude to everybody else. They're not coming to work. They're doing all of this. And then the good employees are just watching them get away with everything.
Yeah.
And that's what makes somebody who has 8 years under their belt leave. Um, and like,
right.
these managers and directors need to be thinking about it differently. Like, you're going to lose someone. You are either going to lose this good employee because you kept the terrible employee, or you can fire the terrible employee and you'll be short for a little while and then you find someone else.
Right.
But like, people have to realize like this will be a pleasant environment, and if you are not pleasant, you cannot stay. Like, we are together for 12 hours.
Right.
Everyone's tired. Everyone has, kids and relationships and all these other things. And it's the very least you can do to make the center better. Also, why am I working in a dungeon with gray walls? You know, if, can we get a plant or a fish or like literally something? Like, your environment means we're this is my office. Over my head, there's a disco ball. Um, there is a planter shaped like a strawberry. I have a pink day bed in case
See
I want
that?
to take a nap during the day with flower pillows on it. Like, I'm surrounded by things that I like, and it makes it a happy environment for me. But then you
Right.
go into your dispatch center, everything is gray, every chair is broken. You're not allowed to like you're not allowed to decorate your desk because you're hot seating.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't. We went our my old agency, we had 9 consoles. 8 of them were like fully set up, and then one of them you could only take calls. It didn't have a radio. So then and we had like a sort of like conference room that was right next to it where we could have training in there, and then it was like the operations center if we had a major event. So we would have like a police guy, a public works guy, a fire guy, an EMS guy, and a dispatcher all in there, all coordinating, and it was abutted the 911 center. They tore down that wall, demolished everything. They made us a new 911 center with 9 consoles, and then no more conference room. So we no longer have a classroom. We no longer have that EOC. And I was like, what are we not looking for growth at all? Why would we build a new center and not add 5 more consoles? Like, you have
Right.
the
Right.
opportunity, and then like they took up all of the carpet and put laminate in there so that it's
Oh,
nice and echoey.
oh my
Oh,
gosh.
good.
And the tall stanchions that were like between all of the desks, they took those away. And so now you're just sitting right next to someone. So now you have like no privacy. And you also, if you're
Like,
sitting next to the loud chick, you're
Oh,
like,
yeah.
when
oh
you're trying to
God.
get your collars, it's like decisions like that that make it a shitty place to work. And until you can make it a more enjoyable experience for people, we're not going to keep anybody, because you don't have to, like, I hate, you heard it here first, kids, you don't have to have a terrible job. Like, you can find a different job, you know,
Right.
at the
Right.
very least, you can find a different agency.
Yeah.
Um, and until they make it a pleasant place to work, no one's going to stay.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate because emergencies are going to keep on coming.
And,
So,
And
and
you have the old school people, which I mean, I guess we're all considered that, but it's like that are like, well, that's the way it's always been. And
mhm.
like people should want to help people, and they should want to do this, and they should want people don't want to do that anymore. People don't care. People do not give a shit about other people's shit. They're like, I have
No,
shit
and
of my
like,
own. I don't want to deal with yours too.
you get these new hires who come in, and during like their first couple weeks, all they're hearing is everybody on the shift talking amongst themselves about how much they hate this job, how much they're going to leave as soon as they find something that pays the same.
Yeah.
They're filling out applications in between calls to like State Farm or wherever they think their skills are going to translate. It's stressful in there. It's loud in there. It's ugly in there. And these people are like, this sucks. And like, everybody's mental health is like in the toilet. They're
Sketchy,
not
right?
paying attention to it, and they're just like, and these kids know like the real truth of it. Like they're like, yeah, I would like to help people, but not at the expense of my sanity. And
Right.
sometimes that is what it is. Like when I left my last agency to go be a corporate trainer, it was incredible the shift like in that happened in my mind because I had
Mhm.
been on night shift for 10 years.
Mhm.
And then I went to days, and I only have to go into the office 1 or 2 days a week. And then I'm at home, with my cat,
Mhm.
and I can make lunch and I can take breaks whenever I want to. Like, even when I'm at the office, nobody cares where I am. Is my work
Right.
turned in? Like, that's it. Nobody is waiting on me to get there. If I don't feel good and I don't want to go into the office on one of my in office days, I just have to send a message and be like, don't feel well working from home today. And they're like, feel better, girl.
Right.
Like,
Right. Right.
there's, and I was like, I was doing a training. I was teaching some software to some clients, and our system went down like in the middle of it. And I was like, uh oh, system just went down. We'll give it a second to see if it comes back up. And I was like, so who knows some jokes? And was just like entertaining these clients for like 5 or 6 minutes. And then the system came back up and I continued with my thing. And afterwards, my boss was like, oh my gosh, we are so impressed with you. Like, that really would have thrown like the other trainers here. Um, they wouldn't have known like what to. And I was like, I'm like, this job is made up. Like, none of this is real. Like, this feels like a simulation. Like, nothing I do here can possibly affect anyone else's life. And like
Right.
the perspective that that gives you once you leave 911 is incredible.
For sure. Yeah. I had a similar thing happen last weekend. I was helping a girl run a horse show, and I usually run a horse show in September at the same facility, and on a bigger scale, and this was just for kids. And it was her first time doing it at this facility, and the first time using particular kind of software to schedule it and score it and all that. And the software went down first thing Saturday morning. And I get like this, and I wasn't planning on going until Saturday afternoon because we were sponsoring something that was happening in the evening. So I get this, panicked message of, I think I need somebody else here. I don't know. Da, da, da. Did
It'll
they
be
have paper to write on? Because if they had paper, we're good. Like,
okay.
I mean, I don't know what
And
to
if
tell
not,
you. Like,
someone run to CVS and get a notebook and a pen. Like,
right. And she was like, oh my God, like it just, but yeah, it's just, yeah, you have a totally different perspective on you know, what is an emergency. And I think people that work for public safety in any capacity, I think you already do, right? There's things that you would not call 911 for that people call 911 for anyway. And you're like, really? Like,
right.
but yeah, it does give you a whole new perspective in when you have a real job or a regular job, I guess is the thing. And I think just the amount of hours often that dispatchers are working, and I get it when it fits your lifestyle and if you want the money and it's a healthy thing that you're doing or you do it for a short amount of time, but with the on-call schedules and you're going to get called in because you're understaffed anyway. So if one person calls out, or heck, maybe nobody calls out, maybe somebody quit, last week. And so you're working so many hours that you're not getting adequate rest. And it's just so much that people are like, I could do something else. And
Yep.
yeah,
It's
so
tough.
it is tough, but we need more dispatchers and we need more dispatchers to stay. So I
Hmm.
think classes like yours are great and hopefully will give people the
It's,
tools they need to stick with it.
I hope so. I really want to like re inspire because most of these are aimed towards people who have experience. Like these are not certification classes,
Right.
you know. Um, they're aimed at people who like already have the fundamentals down. So now we can build on top of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I want you to leave these classes excited to go back and like do something different because you fall into that, you know, when you start realizing that you leave work after a 12-hour shift and you're like, I couldn't tell you a single call that we had today because
Right.
it's just like any other day and they
Yeah,
all
you're trying to do turnover and they're like, so what happened? And you're like, I don't know.
I don't know. I
Same
can't
shit,
tell
different
you
day. I mean,
exactly. You're like I
and then
finished
and then somebody's like,
CrossFit.
remember the shooting? We had a shooting.
Right. And then it's so funny, but you have like these random calls that you remember, like the guy's middle name and the last four of his phone
Or
number.
the license plate. It's burned
Yeah,
in your brain. The stupid tag. Yep.
exactly. But then some days are just like a complete wash because you're so tired and,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but I want people to get a little break, come get some training, you know, and then feel good about it. Like it makes you feel good that like the way we're relating about all these things like God, yes, I hate that too, I did that too, but everything I talk about I have a solution for, I have ideas for. It's like let's figure this out together, let's make it easier. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. Like I just want to pass along all of this knowledge that I have from working so long and from holding so many different positions.
Yep. Right. Very cool. And I will
Okay.
link all of or your website in the show notes. If I
Thank
can
you.
get that out, I will link your website in the show notes.
And we appreciate you being on and spending time with us
Yeah, thanks,
tonight.
guys. This was super fun. It sounds like we all had the same experience.
Yeah,
It
pretty
sounds
much.
very
Yeah,
similar.
Yes, it does.
Very
Well,
I think we need to like start a support network of, how do we get people? Because we all know, I'm sure, people that are still working in the field and who
mhm,
are going through the same struggles, right? And how do you make it better? How do you change it? And it's very hard when you're in the system sometimes to see it. And I know even when I went to part time, I got a different view because we very much had the same thing with the silos on the shifts. And then when you go part-time and you're like, maybe I would work like a 1-to-1, right? So I'd work 6 hours on one shift, 6 hours on another, or, a different rotation. And I'm like, oh, this is,
like
and
flipping a switch.
yeah. And in 2020, I was working part-time, and to see that whole thing from an out, like a looking in lens, like
yeah.
just it's totally different than when you're in it
Hmm.
and you're
Yeah.
taking all that bullshit home with you and you
And
know
I agree with you that OT is a huge problem. And every time somebody asks me like what advice I would give to other dispatchers or to new dispatchers, it's you cannot work hours like that.
no.
Like I would work like 120, 130 hours every 2 weeks. And part of it is because like the money is
The
fantastic.
money, right?
It's like a double paycheck. But the other part of it was that I felt responsible because
Mm-hmm.
if I didn't go and work on the other shift, none of them were going to get breaks because they were at minimum. So they're in there 12, 13 hours, not getting to leave the room at all, that already doesn't have windows in it,
Right.
you know, and that's miserable. It's miserable. And so I
Right.
would feel obligated to go in and
Mm-hmm.
work because I care. But like not everybody
Not
feels
everybody
that
cares.
way. Yeah, not
Right.
everybody cares. And
Right.
other people, you know, are actually you have to keep an eye on yourself as well. And some people were just better than me at that time.
Right.
So they're like, I'm not going to work. I'm tired. And I'm like, but
Right.
nobody can take PTO if I don't go in and work. And they were like, that's the way the cookie crumbles.
Mm,
Mm-hmm.
I'm
yeah.
like, mm.
And that was the reason after I had my boys that I didn't go back full time, because at that point so understaffed, and the on-call schedule was so ridiculous
Mm-hmm.
that I knew I was going to be in the same boat. And that's even why I stopped working part-time, because I felt bad. Like, it was stressing me out knowing that they were in that dire of a straits that they needed people, and I couldn't, because I had kids, right? Or,
Right.
my husband was at work or whatever. And it's just, it's not healthy to take that on. And I think that that's one of the things that management really has to look at and figure out, is how do we take that stress? Because you're right, some people care and are going to stress about that, and some people are not. But you need to be able to identify your people that are stressed about it and help them
Yes,
somehow.
and limit
Right.
their OT.
Exactly.
Unlimited OT, you have to stop people from harming themselves.
Yes.
You just
Right.
do. And you need
Right.
to take a look at these people who are working that much OT, and you're like, I hear that you want to spend a month in Anguilla, but
Right.
but you don't need to do it like this. You have to have healthy boundaries
Yeah.
in everything that
Sure.
you do. And that includes like reminding yourself, like, this 911 center is not my responsibility. And
Right.
these people that I'm breaking my back to come in so that they get breaks, they're not coming in on my shift when we're,
Right.
and so, like, who am I really helping? Like, how much of a difference am I actually making? I'm not inspiring others to, think of this as like a village. So it's a line you have to walk, but you have to keep an eye on yourself, or you will get so burnt out so quick. And
Yep.
then, like, you'll be I remember sitting at work. I was going through a lot, like, personally. Like, my father had just unexpectedly passed away. I had been working like 120-hour weeks for like a couple months. I was tired. I was so burnt out, and I was not medicated. And I would be sitting at work in the middle of the night with absolutely nothing going on, leaned back in my chair with my feet up, and my heart would just be like, just beating like I was being hunted. And I was just sitting there looking at TikToks.
Right.
And that's when I was like, maybe I need to take a break from this for a little bit.
Hmm.
Like, and you keep your certifications up, you can always come back, but you need to recognize your limits. And I want people to stay in dispatch. I want people to see it through. We don't need all new people on every shift. Like, we need you, old heads. Don't quit. Um, but like, you also need to know that your sanity and your health is the most important thing, and your skills are transferable. And when
Right.
it's time for you to get out, it's time for you to get out. But try to stay first. Try to make a difference before you get there. Is that too
That's
bleak? I just feel like that's
nope.
the realist
No.
No, that's like
way.
the truth. That is yes.
Yeah,
That's
and I think it's great advice too. Yeah,
yep.
thank you,
Thank
Robin.
you.
This was
And we'll
awesome.
keep in touch and get people headed your way to hopefully take
Yeah.
some classes.
Yes, come join me. We will talk all the tea you want to
Yes.
know that you didn't get in your certification class. Like,
Right.
what is this
Good
role
stuff.
actually going to be like? That's what you will learn.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you
See you
so
later,
much.
guys.
Take care.
Till next time, y'all.
All
Bye.
right. Bye.